The first sound was the shattering of glass, a sharp, crystalline explosion that sliced through the drowsy afternoon quiet of the Millbrook First National Bank. Wade Kimball didn't flinch. He was standing in line, a sack of flour resting against his leg, his mind miles away, on a broken fence line that needed mending. But the sound and the silence that followed it was a language he understood better than most. Before the first scream, 3 men stormed through the newly ventilated window frame. They moved with a brutal efficiency that spoke of long practice, their faces hidden by dusty bandanas, their hands filled with pistols that seemed to grow out of their fists. "Nobody move," the leader roared, his voice a gravelly command that brooked no argument. "This is a robbery, not a funeral. Don't make it both." The bank's few patrons froze, hands half raised in a universal gesture of surrender. The teller, a young man barely out of his teens, looked as if he might faint. Wade remained still, his gaze sweeping the room, calculating angles, counting threats, his mind falling back into rhythms he had spent 3 years trying to forget. He was just a customer, a farmer in town for supplies. He repeated the words to himself like a prayer, a desperate plea to the man he used to be. "Stay out of it. It's not your fight." The robbers worked quickly. One vaulted the counter, stuffing cash into a canvas sack. Another kept his gun trained on the petrified customers. The leader stalked the room, his eyes scanning for valuables, for any sign of resistance. His gaze fell upon Mrs. Gable, a widow who ran the local boarding house, clutching a small rosewood music box to her chest. "What's that you got there, ma'am?" The leader purred, his voice a low, menacing rumble. "It was my husband's," she whispered, her voice trembling. "A gift for our anniversary. Please, it has no value to you. Everything has value to me." He sneered, snatching the box from her grasp. The sight hit Wade like a physical blow. The delicate rosewood, the inlaid mother of pearl, the small brass key. It was almost identical to the one he had bought for his daughter Katie for her 7th birthday. A birthday she never reached. In that instant, the bank dissolved around him, replaced by a sun-drenched memory, Katie's face alight with pure joy as she wound the key for the first time, the gentle waltz filling their small homestead with a melody that for a time had felt like hope. The memory was so vivid, so visceral, that he could almost smell the pine scent of the wood and feel the warmth of his daughter's small hand in his. Then the memory shattered, just as the bank window had ripped away by the harsh reality of the present. The robber was examining the music box with greedy contempt before stuffing it into his pocket. The sight of that sacred object being desecrated, that symbol of a father's love, being treated as common plunder, ignited a cold fire in Wade's gut. He felt the old instinct stir, the familiar tightening in his shoulders and the slowing of his breath. "Not your fight," he told himself again, but the words had lost their power. His resolve was broken completely when the second robber grew impatient. A young boy no older than 6 had started to cry, his small sobs cutting through the tense silence. The robber turned annoyed and leveled his pistol at the child's tear-streaked face. "Shut that kid up or I'll shut him up for good," he snarled at the boy's terrified mother. Something inside Wade snapped. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was a reflex as deep and undeniable as breathing. The world narrowed to the space between the gunman and the child. He saw the hammer of the pistol begin to cock, saw the fear in the mother's eyes, saw Katie's face superimposed over the crying boy's. He moved. It was not the lumbering movement of a farmer. It was a blur of contained violence, a symphony of speed and precision that belonged to another lifetime. In 2 long strides, he closed the distance. His left hand shot out, deflecting the gun barrel toward the ceiling just as it fired the blast, deafening in the enclosed space. Plaster rained down. His right hand, scarred and calloused from years of ranch work, chopped down on the gunman's wrist. A sickening crack echoed through the bank, followed by a scream of agony as the pistol clattered to the floor. Wade kicked it under a desk, his body already turning to face the other two robbers, his stance low, and balanced his hands open and ready. The bank was frozen in a moment of collective shock. The other robbers, the customers, the teller, everyone stared, dumbfounded. The hulking, quiet man they knew as Wade Kimball, the grieving farmer who kept to himself, had just disarmed a hardened criminal with a speed that defied belief. The leader recovered first, his eyes wide with a mixture of fury and surprise. He raised his pistol, aiming it at Wade's chest. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life, farmer." Wade didn't move. He met the man's gaze, and for the first time in 3 years, the ghost of the man he once was looked out through his eyes, cold, steady, and utterly without fear. He saw the flicker of hesitation in the leader's eyes, the dawning realization that he was not facing a farmer. He was facing something else entirely. "Walk away." Wade set his voice a low growl, rusty from disuse, but carrying the weight of 100 violent confrontations. "Take your money and your friend and leave. Nobody else has to get hurt." He was offering them a choice. He could have ended it right there. His body knew how. But the thought of the child, the memory of Katie, held him back. A bloodbath in the bank would save no one. It would only create more ghosts. The leader held his gaze for a long, tense second. He saw the promise in Wade's eyes, the certainty of what would happen if he pressed the issue. He glanced at his screaming accomplice, then at the sack of money. Greed warred with self-preservation. Self-preservation won. "Get the box." He grunted to the third man. The man retrieved the stolen music box from Mrs. Gable and tossed it back to her before helping his injured partner limp toward the door. The leader backed away slowly, his gun never leaving Wade's chest. "This ain't over," he hissed. "It is for today," Wade replied, his voice flat. The robbers vanished into the dusty street. For a moment, the bank remained in stunned silence. Then the spell broke. The young boy's mother rushed to Wade, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she sobbed. "You saved my son." Wade barely heard her. He was looking at Mrs. Gable, who was clutching her music box as if it were the most precious thing in the world. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, then turned and walked out of the bank, leaving the sack of flour behind. He had come to town for supplies, but he had found something he thought was long buried. And he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that the ghosts of his past had finally found their way to Millbrook. The sun beat down on Millbrook, baking the dust into a fine red powder that coated every surface and settled in the lines around Wade's eyes. 12 miles northwest of town, accessible only by a winding dirt road that discouraged casual visitors, his homestead was less a home than a fortress against memory. He had built it himself from local timber and stone, after the fire its lines solid and practical without pretense. A wide porch wrapped around the front, offering shade from a sun that gave no quarter. He stood on that porch now, his hand resting on one of the support posts. Years ago, in a moment of unthinking joy, he had carved his daughter's initials into the wood KK for Katie Kimball. His thumb traced the weathered letters, a familiar, painful ritual. His grief was not a weight he carried. It was a silent room in his heart he never entered yet, whose presence he felt with every beat. The door to Katie's room at the end of the hall remained locked. He had the key, but he could not bring himself to turn it. To open that door would be to admit that the laughter had truly, finally stopped. The rhythmic clop of a horse's hooves broke the silence. Sheriff Tom Jenkins, a decent man whose perpetually worried eyes had seen too much for a town this small, rode into the yard. He dismounted, his movements stiff. "Wade," Jenkins said, foregoing any greeting. "Folks are talking, saying you took on 3 bank robbers by yourself." "I was in the wrong place at the wrong time," Wade said, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains that shimmered in the heat. "Or the right one," the sheriff countered, stepping onto the porch. "The teller said you moved faster than a striking snake." Said you broke a man's wrist like a dry twig. That's not farmer's work, Wade. I got lucky. Jenkins sighed, the sound heavy with resignation. We both know it wasn't luck. I came out here to thank you. But I also came out here to ask you to be careful. The man you fought runs with a bad crowd. They'll remember your face. I'll keep that in mind, Wade said, his tone making it clear the conversation was over. He watched Jenkins ride away, a plume of red dust marking his path. The sheriff was a good man, but he didn't understand. He saw the incident at the bank as the return of a hero. Wade saw it as the failure of his penance. For 3 years he had lived a life of rigid devotion to piece his days, measured by the rising and setting of the sun, his hands dedicated to building and mending, not breaking. He rose before dawn to tend the small herd of cattle that provided both purpose and income. The physical labor helped quiet the voices in his head, the ones that whispered of failures and might-have-beens. Now the quiet was gone, replaced by the echo of a gunshot and the chilling memory of his own dormant violence. His other few connections in town were just as fragile. Doc Brennan, the town's physician, had been one of the few to show him genuine kindness after Katie's death. The doctor, a man in his 60s with gentle hands and an understanding heart, would sometimes ride out to share a game of chess, their friendship built on the shared silences of men who knew grief. Martha Henley, the schoolteacher, still had tears in her eyes when she spoke of Katie. She understood loss in a way that required no words. But to most of Millbrook, like the gossiping shopkeeper Frederick Walsh and his sharp-tongued wife Prudence, he was a specter, a dangerous man, living on the edge of their peaceful community, now that peace was shattered. He had shown his hand, and the world had taken notice. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and orange, Wade retreated to his bedroom. He knelt and pulled a long wooden chest from beneath his bed. He opened the lid. Wrapped in oiled cloth like relics from a forgotten war lay his guns. His Colt .45 with its worn walnut grip. The Winchester rifle that had never missed its mark. He touched the cold steel of the Colt, the feel of it both alien and intimately familiar. He had made a promise over Katie's grave, a vow to never touch them again. But promises were for a world that made sense, a world where children didn't have guns pointed at their heads in quiet country banks. He closed the chest without removing them. It wasn't time, not yet. But as he sat on the porch watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky, he knew that the quiet life he had built for himself was balanced on the edge of a knife. The ghosts had come calling, and Wade Kimball was beginning to remember how to answer. A week later, Wade was back in Millbrook, his business with the bank, a necessary evil he could no longer avoid. The whispers followed him down the main street, a mixture of awe and fear. He ignored them, his focus on the task at hand. As he left the general store, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the dusty street, his eyes fell upon the train station. The platform should have been empty. The 3 Ozar train had come and gone hours ago, and the next wasn't due until morning. Yet a small figure sat on a bench perfectly still, a porcelain doll clutched tight against her chest. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, with dark hair that caught the last rays of sunlight and a posture of quiet resignation that no child should possess. The sight hit him with the force of a physical blow. A little girl alone waiting. The echo of his own loss was a raw open wound. He had spent years avoiding children, avoiding the playgrounds, avoiding Martha Henley's schoolhouse. But he could not avoid this. He approached slowly, his boots loud on the weathered planks. The girl looked up at him, her eyes the color of autumn leaves. There was no fear in them, only a calm, unnerving watchfulness. "Evening, miss," he said, his voice rusty gritty from disuse. "You waiting for someone?" She nodded solemnly, her grip on the doll tightening. "Mama and Papa were supposed to meet me here. The conductor said they'd be waiting." Her voice was clear and polite, each word carefully pronounced, a stark contrast to the trauma that seemed to shadow her small face. Wade glanced around the empty platform, the lengthening shadows like grasping fingers. What time was that supposed to happen? When the train got here, she said simply. But that was before dinner time, 5 hours ago. A cold dread settled in Wade's stomach. Parents didn't forget their children, not unless something stopped them. "What's your name, child?" he asked, his voice softer than he intended. "Molly Harper," she said, shifting the doll to one arm so she could extend a small formal hand. "Pleased to make your acquaintance, sir." The gesture was so incongruous, so heartbreakingly proper, that it nearly broke him. He shook her hand gently, his large scarred palm engulfing hers. "I'm Wade Kimball. Do you have somewhere to stay while you wait for your folks?" Molly shook her head, her gaze unwavering. "Mama said to wait. I am waiting." The evening air was growing cool and goosebumps were rising on her arms. He could take her to Sheriff Jenkins. That would be the proper thing to do. But something held him back. It was the trust in her eyes, the echo of another little girl who had once depended on him for everything. It was the sudden, overwhelming conviction that life had placed him in this exact spot, at this exact moment, for a reason. "Well, Miss Molly Harper," he said the words, feeling both strange and inevitable on his tongue. "The air is getting cold, and there's a storm brewing in those mountains. I reckon you'd better come home with me tonight. We'll sort out what happened to your folks in the morning." She considered his offer gravely, her old soul eyes weighing the wisdom of trusting a strange man in a strange town. Then she gave a single decisive nod and began to gather her small traveling bag and a wooden crate that rested beside her. "Thank you, Mr. Kimball," she said, her formal tone unwavering. "Mama always said there were good people in the world, if you knew how to recognize them." As Wade lifted her small crate, feeling its surprising weight, he wondered what his own Katie would have thought. Would she have approved of him helping another lost child? Or would she have asked the question that haunted his every waking moment, why couldn't he have been there to save her? He didn't have an answer. All he knew was that for the first time in 3 years, he was not going home alone. The homestead was quiet when they arrived, and the silence deeper and more profound with the presence of another person. Wade helped Molly down from the wagon, and she stood for a moment looking at the solid stone and timber house, a silhouette against the starry sky. "It's a nice house," she said. "Do you live here all by yourself?" "I do," Wade replied, leading her toward the porch. "Might be a bit quiet for someone your age." "I don't mind quiet," she said, a hint of something ancient and sad in her voice. "Sometimes quiet is better than loud." He lit the lamps inside the warm yellow light, revealing the simple Spartan furnishings of his bachelor existence. He had forgotten how to care for a child, what they ate, what they needed. "Are you hungry?" he asked the question, feeling inadequate. "Yes, sir," she said politely, "but I can help cook. Mama taught me how to make biscuits." The offer, so earnest and helpful, cracked something open in his chest. As they worked side by side in the kitchen, Wade preparing a simple stew while Molly mixed biscuit dough with a focused determination, the house began to feel less like a tomb and more like a home. Later, as Molly slept soundly in Katie's old room, a room he hadn't dared to enter, but which he opened for her without a second thought, Wade sat at the kitchen table. He knew he was violating her privacy, but he had to find a clue, a name, anything. He gently opened her small traveling bag. Inside, beneath a neatly folded dress, he found a letter. The envelope bore Molly's name in a woman's careful hand, but it was stained with something dark and rust-colored that his experienced eyes recognized immediately as blood. His hands trembled as he unfolded the single hurried page. "My dearest Molly," the letter began, the script a man's frantic scrawl. "If you are reading this, then your mother and I did not make it to Millbrook. The men who have been hunting us, Silas Creed's men, finally found our trail near Copper Creek. We tried to run, but I fear we have failed you." Wade's throat tightened. He read on the words, painting a picture of desperation and violence. The Harpers had a mining claim, one the Creed gang wanted. When they refused to sell, the threats began. "We sent you ahead because we thought you'd be safe. Your Aunt Margaret was to meet you and take you to Kansas. But we fear Creed's reach is longer than we imagined. If we don't come for you, find a man named Wade Kimball. He lives outside Millbrook and owes your father a debt that can never be fully repaid. Tell him James Harper sent you and he'll understand. He is a hard man with a violent past, but he is the only person we trust to keep you safe from the devils that hunt our family." It was signed by her mother, Catherine, with a postscript scrawled in different ink, barely legible. "Wade, they got us at Devil's Canyon. Keep her safe. James. James Harper." The name hit Wade like a physical blow, dragging him back 15 years to a dusty street in Tombstone. A young deputy, fresh-faced and full of nervous courage, had stepped between Wade and 3 armed men, collecting on a gambling debt. James Harper had taken a bullet in the shoulder that day, a wound that ended his law career, but saved Wade's life. They had been friends, a bond forged in shared danger, though they had lost touch when Wade retired his guns and James started a family. Now James was dead murdered. And his daughter, Wade's goddaughter, he now realized with a jolt, was asleep in the next room, her life entrusted to him by a dying friend's last words. The weight of it was crushing. He folded the letter and slipped it into his pocket. Through the thin walls he could hear Molly stir. In a few moments she would wake and ask about her parents. He would have to find the words to tell a child her world had ended. But first he had preparations to make. The Creed gang was known for its thoroughness. A child was a loose end, a witness. They would come for her. He walked to his bedroom and knelt, pulling out the wooden chest that held his past. The cold, familiar weight of the Colt .45 felt both strange and right in his hand. He checked the action, cleaned the barrel, and loaded 6 fresh cartridges into the cylinder, the metallic clicks echoing the hardening of his own resolve. He did the same for the Winchester, the movement sure and steady, a ritual he had not performed in 3 years but had never forgotten. When Molly appeared in the kitchen doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes and wearing one of Katie's old nightgowns he'd found for her, the weapons were hidden but within reach. The sight of her in his own daughter's clothes nearly broke him. "Good morning, Mr. Kimball," she said politely. "Did Mama and Papa come for me yet?" He gestured to the chair at the table. His voice was gentle, but the words were the hardest he had ever spoken. "Sit down, Molly. We need to talk about your folks." He waited until she was seated, her doll placed carefully beside her. "No, sweetheart. They're not coming. Something bad happened. They won't be able to take care of you anymore." She stared at him, her young face a mask of solemn understanding. "Are they dead?" The directness of the question stole his breath. He had expected tears denial. Instead, she watched him with eyes that held an impossible wisdom. "Yes," he said simply. "I'm so sorry, Molly. They're dead." She nodded slowly, as if confirming a truth she already carried. "I thought they might be. Mama said if that happened, I should find you. She said you would take care of me." That simple statement of faith, a legacy from a dead friend, settled Wade's course. "Your mama was right," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. "I'm going to take care of you. I promise. Even if the bad men come here." The question was a cold sliver of ice in his gut. "The bad men might come looking for you," he said, choosing honesty over comfort. "But I won't let them hurt you." She reached across the table and squeezed his hand, her small grip surprisingly strong. "Mama said you were the strongest man she ever knew. She said you could protect anyone from anything if you wanted to." He looked at this small, brave girl who had lost everything and still found the strength to trust. The Creed gang might have numbers and a reputation for ruthlessness, but they had never faced Wade Kimball when he was fighting for something more precious than his own life. They had never faced a father. The first days with Molly were a clumsy dance of grief and discovery. Wade learned that she preferred her eggs scrambled, not fried, and that she hummed the same gentle waltz from Katie's music box when she was concentrating. She was remarkably resilient, a small, sturdy plant, adapting to barren soil. She followed him on his chores, her questions endless and insightful, her presence slowly filling the hollow spaces of his life. He began to teach her things: how to read the sky for weather, how to mend a fence, how to approach a nervous horse. In return, she taught him how to live again. Her laughter, when it finally came, a bright, silvery sound, as she tried and failed to milk their cow, was the most beautiful thing he had ever heard. He couldn't just wait for Creed to arrive. Hiding was not a strategy. It was a slow death. He had to understand his enemy. After a week, he made a difficult decision. He rode into town and found Martha Henley at the schoolhouse. "Miss Henley," he set his hat in his hands, "I need to ask a favor. I have to travel for a few days. I was hoping Molly could stay with you." Martha's warm smile was immediate. "Of course, Mr. Kimball. It would be a pleasure. She is a remarkable child." With Molly safe, Wade rode west, not east. He was not looking for an escape route. He was looking for intelligence. He rode to dusty county seats and forgotten mining towns, places where men like Silas Creed left a trail. He asked quiet questions in loud saloons, his inquiries veiled and indirect. He listened to the whispers of prospectors and the boasts of drifters. A picture began to form, not of a simple claim jumper, but of a man who operated with the precision of a chess master. Silas Creed didn't use violence as a tool. He used it as a language. He was known for his patience, for studying his victims, for learning their weaknesses and turning them into weapons. He didn't just break his enemies. He dismantled them piece by psychological piece. In a dusty courthouse basement, poring over old territorial records, Wade found what he was looking for, though he did not know it at the time. It was a faded newspaper account from Tombstone dated 15 years prior. The headline was sensational. "Deputy Downs 2 in street shootout." The article described a confrontation outside the Silver Dollar Saloon. A young deputy named James Harper had intervened in a dispute between a notorious gunfighter and 3 men sent to collect a debt. The gunfighter was not named, referred to only as a well-known drifter. The story detailed how Deputy Harper had heroically stood his ground, killing 2 of the debt collectors before being wounded himself. The names of the dead men were listed at the bottom of the column. One of them was Elias Creed. Wade stared at the name, the brittle paper trembling in his hand. Elias Creed. He remembered the face of the young man James had shot, arrogant, cruel, and barely 20. And he remembered the other man, the one who had fled, screaming threats of vengeance. Silas. It had never been about the mining claim. That was a lie, a ruse to draw the Harpers out, a way to torture James before the end. This was a vendetta 15 years in the making. And Silas wasn't just hunting the man who pulled the trigger. He was hunting the man whose recklessness had caused the confrontation in the first place. He, Wade Kimball, was the unnamed gunfighter. He was the reason Elias Creed was dead. He was the reason James Harper was a target. And now he was the reason Silas Creed was coming for Molly. The realization was a punch to the soul. He wasn't Molly's noble protector, an innocent shield against evil. He was the catalyst. He was the ghost at this feast of vengeance. The debt James spoke of in his letter wasn't just about saving his life. It was about the terrible consequences that had flowed from that single act of heroism. He rode back to Millbrook with a new and terrible urgency. The weight of his past was no longer a private burden. It was an active threat, a predator stalking an innocent child. The fight that was coming wasn't just for Molly's future. It was for Wade's own atonement. He confessed everything to Sheriff Jenkins and Doc Brennan in the back room of the doctor's office, the smell of antiseptic sharp in the air. He laid out the whole ugly story from the gambling debt in Tombstone to the name on the faded newspaper. Jenkins listened, his face grim. So this Silas Creed, he's been planning this for 15 years. He's patient, Wade said, his voice flat. And he's methodical. He's not going to ride in with guns blazing. He'll try to break us first. Then we won't break, Doc Brennan said, his quiet voice filled with steel. He looked at Wade, his eyes clear and steady. You're not alone in this, Wade. This town owes you. And we all owe that little girl a chance. The threat materialized 2 days later. Not as an attack, but as a whisper. 2 of Creed's men were seen camped just north of town. They made no move, spoke to no one. They just watched. Their presence was a psychological siege, a constant silent pressure on the town. Fear began to curdle the air in Millbrook. Doors were locked earlier. Parents kept their children close. Then came the message. A frightened circuit preacher passing through on his way north delivered it directly to Wade at the homestead. It was a single pristine sheet of paper, the handwriting an elegant flowing script. Mr. Kimball. It read, "It has come to my attention that you are caring for the orphan of Mr. James Harper. A commendable, if foolish, gesture. A final accounting is due for the events that transpired in Tombstone so many years ago. I trust you will find it in your heart to settle our family's accounts peaceably. I shall be in Millbrook soon to discuss the terms. Cordially, Silas Creed." The polite, charming words were more terrifying than any open threat. Creed was not coming for a fight. He was coming for a negotiation, and Wade knew with chilling certainty that the only currency he would accept was Molly's life. The day Silas Creed came to town, and the sky itself seemed to hold its breath. A strange yellow light filtered through a gathering haze, and the wind began to whip dust into stinging clouds. A sandstorm was coming, a churning wall of grit and fury rolling in from the plains. Wade had brought Molly to town to stay with Martha Henley, thinking she would be safer there, away from the isolated homestead. He, Jenkins, and Doc Brennan were meeting in the saloon to plan their next move when the storm hit its arrival, sudden and violent. The sky went dark. Wind howled, rattling the windows and forcing sand through every crack in the saloon's walls. Within minutes, Millbrook was enveloped in a roaring, blinding tempest, and through the storm they came. The saloon doors swung open, admitting a blast of sand and a silhouette. Silas Creed stepped inside, brushing dust from the shoulders of his fine black coat. He was tall and handsome, his smile disarmingly charming his eyes, as cold and empty as a winter sky. Behind him, 4 of his men filed in, their guns drawn but held loosely, their confidence absolute. The saloon's few patrons, Frederick Walsh, a few ranchers, a blacksmith, froze. Sheriff Jenkins and Doc Brennan, who had been sitting at a table with Wade, slowly rose to their feet. Sheriff Jenkins Creed said, his voice a smooth baritone that cut easily through the howl of the wind. "A pleasure. I apologize for the intrusion, but the weather is most inhospitable. I trust you won't mind if we wait it out here." "You're not welcome here," Creed Jenkins said, his hand hovering near his pistol. Creed's smile widened. "Oh, I think I am. You see, I have business with Mr. Kimball." He turned his gaze to Wade, and the charm fell away, revealing the predator beneath. "We have so much to discuss, you and I. 15 years of catching up to do." He gestured for his men to spread out, effectively trapping the townsfolk. The ticking of the saloon clock was a maddeningly steady counterpoint to the raging storm outside. "There's nothing to discuss," Wade said, his voice low. Molly was safe at the schoolhouse. That was all that mattered. "But that's where you're wrong." Creed replied, his tone conversational. He sauntered over to the saloon doors and peered out into the maelstrom. A storm like this can be so disorienting. A person could get lost, a small person especially. He turned back, his eyes glinting. "For instance, a little girl walking from the schoolhouse thinking she could find her Papa Wade. Wade's blood ran cold. He saw Jenkins's face pale. The saloon doors opened again. Another of Creed's men stepped inside, holding Molly firmly by the arm. She wasn't crying. Her small face was set, her eyes fixed on Wade with unwavering trust. "Papa Wade," she said, her voice small but clear. "He said he would bring me to you." Creed had anticipated his every move. He hadn't just laid a trap. He had built a cage and baited it with the one thing Wade could not afford to lose. "Let her go, Creed," Wade snarled. "All in due time." Silas said, seating himself at a table as if he owned the place. "First, a history lesson for the good people of Millbrook." He proceeded to tell the story of Tombstone, his version painting Wade as a reckless drunk whose foolish pride led to the death of his beloved younger brother Elias. He portrayed James Harper not as a hero, but as a trigger-happy lawman who shot a boy in the back. "All I seek is justice." Creed concluded, his voice ringing with false sincerity. "An eye for an eye. My brother's life was taken. James Harper paid with his, but his legacy remains." He nodded toward Molly. "And then, there is the man who started it all." He looked directly at Wade, his face a mask of cold reason. "So I offer you a choice, Kimball. A terrible choice, I admit, but a choice nonetheless. Give me the girl. Let me finish my family's business, and I will ride out of this town and never return. Your new friends will be safe. The cycle of vengeance will end." Or his voice dropped to a whisper you can fight. "And every man, woman, and child in this room will die before you do." The townsfolk stared, their faces a mixture of terror and pleading. Creed had made them part of the equation, made them hostages in Wade's moral dilemma. "Don't listen to him, Papa Wade," Molly said, her voice shaking but resolute. "Mama said you always do what's right." Creed laughed. "What is right? What about your sainted father, James? Did he always do what was right?" He leaned forward, enjoying his final cruel twist of the knife. "Did he ever tell you about the year he spent after Tombstone? The guilt ate him alive. He gave up his badge and became a bounty hunter, a killer for coin. He had a darkness in him too, Kimball. He only found his redemption when he met his wife. See, even good men have their secrets. Redemption is a choice. He was trying to break him, to show him that the lines between good and evil were blurred, that his sacrifice would be for nothing." But as Wade looked at Molly's trusting face, at the fear in his neighbor's eyes, at the memory of James Harper giving his life to save his, the choice became clear. This was no longer about his past or even about Molly. It was about the soul of this town. It was about drawing a line in the sand and declaring that innocence would not be traded for safety. Redemption wasn't a choice you made once. It was a choice you made every day. "I've made my choice." Wade said, his voice calm. He looked at Creed, the ghost of the gunfighter rising one last time. "You should have killed me in Tombstone." As the sandstorm raged outside, obscuring the world in a shroud of chaos, Wade's hand dropped to his Colt. The final battle for Millbrook, for Molly, and for his own soul had begun. The saloon exploded into a maelstrom of sound and fury. Gunfire, the crash of breaking glass, the splintering of wood, all of it competing with the shriek of the wind outside. Wade moved with a fluid grace that belied his size, his first shot taking out the man holding Molly, who instinctively dove behind the overturned table, where Doc Brennan was already providing cover. Jenkins and Brennan fought with the desperate courage of men defending their home. But Creed's men were professionals, using the terrified patrons as human shields, their shots methodical and deadly. Wade's world narrowed to a series of targets. His mind was a cold, calculating machine, but his heart was on fire. He was no longer just a gunfighter. He was a father protecting his child, a lawman protecting his town. He fought with the sum of all he had ever been. He saw Silas Creed calm amidst the chaos, reloading his pistols behind the bar. Their eyes met across the smoky room. This was between them. It had always been between them. Wade charged forward, firing as he moved, forcing Creed's remaining men back. He vaulted the bar, landing in a crouch as Creed fired the bullets, splintering the wood where his head had been a second before. They were face to face now, only a few feet apart, the air thick with the smell of gunpowder and hate. "You chose this," Creed screamed over the din. "You did," Wade replied and fired. His bullet struck Creed in the shoulder, spinning him around. Creed staggered but didn't fall, bringing his own pistol up. Before he could fire, a single sharp rifle crack echoed from the back of the room. A look of profound surprise crossed Silas Creed's face. He looked down at the new hole in his chest, then collapsed behind the bar, his reign of vengeance finally over. Wade looked up to see Doc Brennan, his old army rifle smoking, giving him a grim, steady nod. The fight was over. Silence descended, broken only by the whimpering of the wounded and the dying howl of the storm. And then, as if on cue, the wind stopped. A single ray of sunlight pierced the gloom, streaming through a bullet hole in the saloon wall and illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The storm had broken. The townsfolk who had cowered in fear slowly rose. They looked at the carnage at the bodies of Creed's men, and then at Wade, who stood bruised, bleeding, but unbroken. Their expressions were no longer filled with fear or suspicion, but with a profound, awestruck gratitude. He wasn't the town outcast anymore. He was their protector. Molly ran to him, burying her face in his leg. He knelt, ignoring the searing pain in his side, and wrapped his arms around her. Sheriff Jenkins limped over his face, etched with exhaustion and relief. He walked behind the bar, not to the whiskey bottles, but to a small wooden box on the wall. He took out a key, unlocked it, and removed a yellowed, creased piece of paper. It was an old wanted poster bearing the face of a younger, harder Wade Kimball. The Millbrook Ghost. In front of the silent, watching crowd, Sheriff Jenkins tore the poster into small pieces and let them fall to the floor like confetti. "Seems to me," the sheriff said, his voice ringing through the quiet saloon, "that any debt you owed this world has been paid in full." 6 weeks later, the adoption was finalized. In the eyes of the law, Molly Harper became Molly Kimball. In their hearts, they had been father and daughter for much longer. The homestead, repaired by the grateful hands of the men of Millbrook, felt more like a home than ever before. Spring had arrived, painting the valley in vibrant shades of green and gold. On a bright, clear afternoon, Wade and Molly stood in the yard beside a newly planted sapling, a young oak that would one day grow tall and strong. In his hand, Wade held the silver dollar he had carried for 20 years, the tarnished talisman of his gunfighting past. It had been his companion through countless violent nights, a symbol of luck, of chance, of a life lived on the edge. "This coin belonged to the man I used to be," he said softly to Molly. "He doesn't need it anymore." He dug a small hole at the base of the sapling. He looked at the coin one last time, then placed it in the earth. Together, he and Molly pushed the dirt back over it, burying his old self and planting a new life in its place. As they stood admiring their work, the mail rider came up the road, a rare sight at their remote homestead. He handed Wade a single letter, postmarked from Kansas. Wade opened it, his brow furrowed in confusion. The letter was from Margaret, Molly's aunt. "Dear Mr. Kimball," it read. "Please forgive my long silence. For weeks I was unable to travel, watched by men I now know worked for Silas Creed. They meant to keep me from reaching Molly. It was only after news of your incredible bravery reached us that I was free. I have heard everything you have done for my niece, the risks you have taken, the love you have shown her. James and Catherine could not have chosen a better man. There is no home safer for her, and no heart more deserving of her love than yours. God bless you both. Please be a family. It is what they would have wanted." Wade read the letter aloud to Molly. When he finished, her eyes were shining with tears, but her smile was radiant. The final loose thread of her old life had not been cut, but woven beautifully into the fabric of her new one. All the ghosts were finally at peace. He looked at his daughter at their home at the mountains, standing sentinel against the clear blue sky. The gentle waltz from Katie's music box drifted from the open window, a sweet, hopeful melody, mingling with Molly's happy laughter. Wade Kimball, gunfighter turned father, knew that James Harper's greatest gift hadn't been saving his life all those years ago. It had been showing him what that life was truly worth.